Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio inside Max 6 Conscious Workspace in Tempe, Arizona, where we help build businesses and connect you with the right people. I'm your host and Phoenix Business Radio studio CEO, Karen Nowicki, and we are very excited to come back today for the third in a series around racism in small business and the arts. We bring together, as I mentioned a moment ago, the right people and the right balance to have a delicate conversation surrounding racism in small business and the arts. Every show provides perspectives of both sides of the color spectrum. This is a place where the comfortable come to be uncomfortable through the expansion of one's perspective. And we do hope you'll continue to join us and to go back and listen to the other podcasts as well. Without further ado, I would like to introduce, actually, before I do that, I want to read a few words that I have been jotting down as I'm listening to the book White Fragility that we thought we would use as the catalyst for today's conversation. And just sit with these words as I mention them to you. Exploitation, racism as a system, bias, bigotry, reverse racism, whiteism, social construction, de facto versus de jure, advantages, racial division, privilege, classism, prejudice, racial justice, suffrage, discrimination, oppression, myopic view, personal responsibility, and collective conscious or collective consciousness. It's a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. So
it's a lot.
It's a lot. And we're only together for an hour for this particular episode, but I do that more so for our listening audience and really for the four of us to presence ourselves in this conversation. For those of you joining us for the first time, we here at Business RadioX, with the majority of our shows, including this particular series, we pride ourselves around having these conversations that are very open. They're not rehearsed. We have a few topics and questions in mind that we want to address, but we really want this to take us wherever it needs to take us, and trusting that it will do just that. So I mentioned that I was going to share and introduce you to the rest of our panel. Please welcome for the first time Anne Garland. She's the creative director with Anne Garland Enterprises. And Camilla was the first to say, for our next conversation, we really ought to consider having Annie with us. And we are very happy in her extremely busy schedule that she agreed on such short notice. So welcome. And thank you again for being here, Annie.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fun to be here.
Absolutely. And then with us also, I mentioned Camilla's name just a minute ago. Camilla Ross is with us from Sedona, Arizona. And we welcome you back. And I'm so grateful for your commitment and your courage and just your willingness to help the rest of us, including yourself, navigate through these conversations, Camilla.
Good morning, and thank you, Karen. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you guys this morning.
And Karen Loomis with No Moss Brands is not too far from me. I'm at the studio today, and I think Karen's only a handful of miles away. But we have Karen to thank, as well as Camilla, for saying this is really a conversation, more than one conversation, that needs to take place so that we can be more supportive and help really educate and hopefully influence and encourage others to speak up and hopefully change the trajectory of where we're going as a nation and a world, for that matter, around racism, particularly because we're each business owners and the arts. We want to focus on that because that's really, at least at Business RadioX, where the majority of our listening audience is as well. So Karen, welcome back. Thank you so much for everything.
Of course. Thank you, Karen, for everything that you're doing to bring us all together and to really kind of provide that conduit, that kind of transition, and also just giving us this safe place to have this conversation. I was at Quick Trip this morning and I saw the sign for Safe Place and I thought, oh my goodness, this is really what we are trying to create for our audience. It's a safe place to come where you're allowed to have the emotions you have, but yet it's a place where you can come to learn or unlearn things that maybe you didn't even realize had become part of you. And so that's really what the basis of all of this is from a racism perspective is much of this behavior is learned. And until I started to read the book White Fragility, I myself had no idea what I didn't know. And most of you are sitting there going, how in the hell does an African American who has lived this long not know this stuff? Well, it's no different than you as a white American not knowing it either. So right off the bat, what you have to do in order to have this conversation, in order for this conversation to occur in a safe place, is you have to be willing to accept that you maybe don't know something. And until you can do that, you aren't open to accepting new material or learning something different. And so for me, as I progressed through the book, it didn't take me long. And most of you have seen kind of the messages that we sent. Within the first 3 chapters, I was going, what the holy hell world have I lived in that I had no idea I was even living in it now? But what it really did for me, though, even in the first 3 chapters, is it made me go, this explains so much now. Holy crap. So here's my suggestion to you. If you have not read the book, you don't really need to feel like you can't participate, but take it as slow as you need to, because you need to sit with those feelings. And this is something that Karen and Annie really kind of talk about when they're working with their clients. But you really need to sit with your reaction. Because one of the things that I find the hardest to do is to have a conversation with someone who, the minute you use the word racism, they already are defensive. So that's my hope for you for the rest of this hour that we have together, is that you will be able to recognize that there's no guilt, there's no shame. You didn't know, I didn't know. Hey, welcome to my world.
That's so refreshing, that invitation. And I know the 4 of us have shared that, but with the way that social media is right now about any topic, it could be a hangnail for that matter. Everybody is, I believe this about the hangnail. I believe that. And shame on you. And you're an asshole if you believe this. And you're, everything. And particularly around racism. And some of the shame that I've had to find myself feeling guilty and shameful for things, even though I would say that I've always been really mindful around unity. We're all one. And so that's helpful for me, Karen. It's an awareness, it's an education, it's a willingness to say, I don't know. And it's a willingness to say, I'm sorry for not knowing, or whatever that is, without necessarily, at least in my situation, the shame and the guilt that I thought I was being asked to carry around this conversation.
I can't believe how naive I was to everything. I mean, I was just blown away by this book, even the first chapter, just right out of the gate. I believe anybody who reads this book, like Karen, being a Black woman, saying, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I'm sitting here saying, I didn't know any of this. I don't even know the history, which I'm ashamed of that, right? And I sat here reading this book and I'm like, wow, I'm really ignorant. And I'm embarrassed to say that. And yet my eyes are open. I lead with the fact, I think I quoted saying my eyes are wide shut, right? I think that was one of the quotes I used. And I'm just blown away by the opportunity. And I want to thank you, ladies. For me, this is a gift. This is a gift because I know so many women who need to know this. And I know these conversations are uncomfortable. And I even connected with a few of my Black friends and asked questions. And they were willing to talk to me, which I was, I'm like, I'm not going to apologize because of my environment and my situation, that I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I say to the audience that's out there, please go read this book. Please, if there's one message that we leave you with, if you're on this call, this phone, this time, go and read the book, because I was blown away. Let me just also say this. I was blown away by listening to your last session of how much, Karen and Camilla, how some of the things that you go through, I am just blind. So maybe we can share some of those again, or, go back and listen to the previous podcast. But wow, I'm just, that's it. I'm speechless at the moment. So
a great book. It's a very telling story that everyone must read, because there are things in there that people will never understand until you live it. And, the beautiful part about people who write and tell stories, they tell them from their experiences. And I think that's the one way that we can learn in life, is through our experiences and through other people's experiences. And so White Fragility, y'all need to pick that book up, because it is just, there's so much goodness in it and so much willingness for people to understand not only her side of life, but the African American side of life and the things that we as people go through. There's so many times where so many things happen and you just don't know what to say. And sometimes you're just going to be silent because it comes out of somebody's mouth and you just don't know what to say. And I'm going to leave it there.
I just had no idea.
I think, though, for me, I want to get us a little bit more specific around kind of our experiences, not just on reflecting on the book, because the book is like any book.
It's a catalyst.
It starts things. It starts things in your mind. It gets you reflecting on your world. And for me, I've always had this philosophy that kind of runs along the same grain as the Four Agreements. I'm sure you ladies are all familiar with that book. And the Four Agreements has four, obviously, agreements, hence the name, but four very, what I call my guiding principles. I'm not a highly religious person. I was raised Catholic, so that's a very strong part of my background. You can't get rid of that, even though you may not support it today, right, Karen? But so the Four Agreements always felt really like a place for me. And one of the agreements, and you guys who are familiar with the book will recall, one of the agreements is be impeccable with your word.
Yes.
And that is always how I have presented myself and communicated my feelings to the world, is in this idea that I am being impeccable with my word, and these things that I'm saying regarding whatever the scenario are the exact same thing I would say no matter who was present. To me, it's that integrity piece. Yeah. But here's something that really floored me as I got further through the book. That philosophy of integrity and being impeccable with your word, I have always used this thought process of your words that you use to communicate to me may have not intended to hurt me or my feelings. And so I've always used that thought process of I will use that and take that into consideration with your apology for your behavior, whether it was a racism comment or something else. But what this book brought up regarding racism, and it was something that totally shifted my own personal philosophy on how I function in the world, is what this book said, and if you think about it very specifically when it comes to racism, was it's not the intent, it's the impact of those words. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to leave that with you guys and let you guys chat that one through.
Yeah, that's powerful, okay? Because it's straight up, real life, everything we say impacts us to a degree that we'll never understand. Because once those words are said, they cannot be taken back. And we take those and we digest them and we look at them and we analyze them and we feel those words.
Yeah.
And it makes you second guess yourself. And I don't like to second guess myself, because it tells me that there's something wrong with the solution that I came up with. So if I'm second guessing myself, I'm saying to myself, this doesn't fit within my world, my realm of values, I guess is the best way to look at it, right? And so it leaves me a little bit confused on what to do. So perfect example to that is in our first show. And we keep talking about this. And this is the reason we keep talking about this, because Dre, who was on our first show, we love him. And what we love about Dre is he has this opposing view, and he is not afraid to voice it as an African American. But his voice and his feelings were very different from what Camila and I experienced. And this is a point that we want to try to make to all the listeners is every single African American experience is not the same. We don't walk all the same path any more than you guys do. So while he's bringing up what he had said in the first show was he does not believe systemic racism exists.
Wow. Yeah.
And boom, what do you do with that information when we're sitting here in a panel that's saying the hell if it doesn't? It is impacting everything we do. So back to that word impact. The impact of his words have caused all of us for the last 6 weeks to go, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
Did you question him on it?
Oh,
so
well,
we did and we did and we didn't. And I know, Dre, I'm the one who invited him to the conversation. And what I'll say is equally important for his message from what he was saying is that we are all personally responsible for our life. And in his case, he is a born-again Christian, and he really believes that, you know, his Savior is Jesus Christ, and that's who will be the judge at the end of his lifetime, at his transition. And Dre, if you're listening to this one, which I hope you are, and I've misrepresented, or if Karen has misrepresented what you were sharing with us, please let us know. And we won't spend a lot of time here, but I think that's equally important because Camilla and Karen and I were the other folks in that conversation. And when Dre spoke to personal responsibility and divine love and that sort of thing, we were all nodding our heads in an agreement. And yes, and the piece that I think each of the three of us struggled with is this idea that systemic racism is not it's not real. And as I've been and I was wondering, like, that's part of why I invited him on. I thought, well, is it? I don't know if it's real or not. And as we have had these conversations both on air and offline as we're preparing for each new segment, I'm ever aware that it is real as this blouse. So with that, Camilla, if you don't mind, before we let you share, could I share one of the 2 clips that I pulled, because I think it might be appropriate right now?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. So for our listeners, I told the gals that as I listen to White Fragility, I've been hitting clip on my Audible or my audio thing just every time she says something which is profound. It's like every 30 seconds. And if this is the first time that you've heard of this book, it's White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and we've all already said it's a must read. And I hope that you would even think about having an accountability partner or 7 and read it together like a book. Yeah. Like a book group. But here's the piece, because I think it fits into what we're talking about around systemic racism. Let's see if I can get this to play for everyone to hear. Give me a thumbs up, ladies, on the video if you can hear me.
When the prejudice causes me to act differently, I am less relaxed around you, or I avoid interacting with you. I am now discriminating. Prejudice also manifests itself in action, because the way I see the world drives my actions in the world. Everyone has prejudice, and everyone discriminates. Given this reality, inserting the qualifier reverse is nonsensical. When a racial group's collective prejudice is backed up by the power of legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed into racism, a far-reaching system that functions independently from the intentions or self-images of individual actors. J. Kehaulani Kawanui, professor of American Studies and Anthropology at Wesleyan University, explains, racism is a structure, not an event. American women's struggle for suffrage illustrates how institutional power transforms prejudice and discrimination into structures of oppression. Everyone has prejudice and discriminates, but structures of oppression go well beyond individuals. While women could be prejudiced and discriminate against men in individual interactions, women as a group could not deny men their civil rights. But men as a group could and did deny women their civil rights. Men could do so because they controlled all the institutions. Therefore, the only way women could gain suffrage was for men to grant it to them. Women could not grant suffrage to themselves. Similarly, racism, like sexism and other forms of oppression, occurs when a racial group's prejudice is backed by legal authority and institutional control.
Thank you for playing that, Karen, though, because that really does help the listener set the stage for the much more historical part, which is what the front aspect of the book does, is it really sets the stage for how historically we have been misinformed, or I should say, we've only gotten half of the story. And so when you only get half of the story, your perspective is obviously skewed, and that first part of the book does that, and that little excerpt kind of helps kind of balance and give a foundation for our listener.
Absolutely. Paul Harvey. And here's the rest of the story, folks.
So it's always been white man's privilege and control.
Personal experience. And what Dre said, everybody has their own personal experience, and this is true. But when you're living in a world that has such a male dominance, if you will, everything is subject. You look at it, and you're looking at it kind of from your perspective, and you realize that it has this grip, this male grip, this testosterone grip. You know what I mean? And you can't even breathe. Even as a woman, you can't even breathe. And so when I'm dealing and talking with other women about this particular subject, and they say, "Well, we didn't get the right to vote," and so on, no, you didn't. But black women didn't get the right to vote until 1960. What?
64, the year I was born, 55 years ago. Yeah.
I feel that. But we got to get a grip. We got to get a handle. We got to get the truth. And here it is sitting before you.
And I want to invite our listeners, as we're talking about this, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable right in this moment. And when we feel discomfort, sometimes we want to hit stop or delete, or we find ourselves multitasking and avoiding sitting in the discomfort. And as Karen invited us to do at the beginning of this conversation, we hope, whether you're male or female, whatever your upbringing is and your background and the color of your skin, stay with this. Stay with the discomfort. It's not unlike, I think, discomfort. As I talk about discomfort, getting married or having a baby or moving to a new neighborhood or starting a new job or starting school or switching careers. We are born into this human experience, and we think that what we want to do is we want to live in this little security, in this little comfort zone, right? Because it feels good most of the time. Even sometimes when it doesn't, it's comfortable, so we stay there. And what we're inviting you to do is just notice and witness, God, I like Karen said, this didn't feel good for me, but I didn't know why. Mind blown. Like, now I get it. And we can only do that if we sit in the discomfort and we work through the challenge of our thinking and our beliefs and challenge those thoughts and those beliefs.
We all have to do that across the board. As an African American, I am constantly, challenging myself and looking at things. And I'll give you a great example. Selma. When Selma came out, I watched it. And Ava DuVernay, she's just phenomenal. I love her. She's so phenomenal. I saw that movie, but after I saw that movie, I sat in that seat and I said, what is my part in this? How am I contributing to this as an African-American woman, a Black woman? What is my purpose? How do I fit in that scenario? And it's good to ask that question all the time.
Can you share what some of the answers are and have continued to come to? I mean, I know, obviously, making this commitment with Karen and I and those who join us has been a part of it. But what else have you discovered as you've challenged your own thinking?
For me, it's like, okay, so when I'm having a conversation, I am very mindful in that conversation what I am thinking. And I'm thinking before I speak. Because we don't...
I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to laugh, but we kind of make the assumption that that's part of communication.
You have to think before you speak, and so many people don't do that. They just off the mouth, don't even think about what they're saying, have no idea the impact it's going to make. And so for me, I am very mindful and I'm very intentional about the words that I use because I'm thinking about those as I'm saying them. And when I say them in that moment, that is what I mean. And we have to be straight and upfront and personal about that. So, it's a great thing.
Karen's doing a happy dance over here.
I have a comment that I'm going to give you one little snippet from when we get close to the end of the book that sums up exactly what Camilla's talking about. So at the end of the book, Robin DiAngelo, she talks about she brings on this person called Devin Alexander, and he's an equity consultant, which is a phenomenal title, right? An equity consultant. I'd like that title. But this is what he said. She, I'm assuming it's a he with that name. Perhaps the most pernicious form of pressure on people of color is the pressure to collude with white fragility by minimizing their racial experiences to accommodate white denial and defensiveness. So we, as African Americans, are conscious of every aspect of our communication and how it's going to impact you and your bias.
Our fragileness.
And it impacts our ability to communicate you. So what the book does talk about is those friendships that you have with people of your own race. You don't have those barriers. You just vomit it out and it comes out and, and there it is. It's out there. But when you are doing communication interracially, because that's our system, that's what we have set up, that's where the issue really lies. And so we are tiptoeing around you, and we can't even say the word race without you going, no, I'm not a racist.
Don't pull the race card.
I'm not a racist because my uncle, he dated a gal in college. She was black. And she came to dinner one time, and it was a potluck, though. So she brought those black-eyed pea things. I mean, this is the shit, people.
I believe Robin DiAngelo, she called that color blindness. That was in the book.
And she did call it color blindness very carefully.
We're at 7:30, and it's that time, Karen. It's 11:30. Can I do it?
Yes, please.
Do it.
Y'all, it's 11:30, but I got to tell you, to continue these on-air conversations on racism and impact on small business and the arts, we are looking for a premier sponsor and a handful of show sponsors. Sponsors receive an on-air mention as well as a variety of promotional opportunities before, during, and after each show. And if you are a business who would like to support positive change, I'm asking you to please contact Karen at nomosbrands.com for more information. So we thank you for listening, and back to Karen.
Which Karen? Pick a Karen, any Karen.
Karen Lewis, what?
Ladies, I just love your passion, your honesty. Over the last few days, just interacting with you. I mean, and these conversations, I mean, they're just so heartening. I mean, I just wish, how can we help? How can a white person help and answer? Where do we go from here? I mean, I know I can make people aware, tell them about the book, but how can I help you other than being a sponsor? I know you could use a sponsor, but
we got a first sponsor?
Possibly.
That question that you ask, it's good, be open to conversation.
Okay.
Because a lot of Black people, they want to have conversations, our white counterparts, but sometimes that's difficult.
I've never had these conversations with Karen, I've known you for a few years. Camilla, I've known you even longer. We've never had these conversations.
Yeah.
We've never taken the time. And so,
if you think about it, here's why. As an African American, I'm willing to have the conversation any day of the week. But your fragility, not yours, but the listener's fragility prevents me from having that conversation. Because what happens is, if I say anything somewhat a little, and my way about things is I add a little joke to it. make it kind of funny so we can all appreciate the humor and we can get the real point of it. But what happens is that, and this is part of what the book is talking about, what happens is the minute we start getting into the conversation where we start to kind of look like maybe we're making some headway, and then the bomb comes. Yeah, but what about black on black crime?
Oh, y'all. No. See, there you go with that black on black crime stuff. You know what I'm saying? It ain't about that because we care about that. Okay, we care about those murders. But this is the issue. We can't deflect from what's happening right here, right now, because it's all related. The black on black crime is related to the racism, to the systemic racism, to how people deal with one another, how black people deal with one another, how black people deal with black people who are lighter than them, thus going across the board. So that's where I sit with that. Those are the things that people ask, these questions that, are things that you can just think about. Ask questions.
One of the things...
Have a conversation and not be defensive. It's simple.
And I've had conversations with my friends who are defensive, and I've got to give them permission. I don't want to rephrase it that way. I need to allow them to be defensive. How's that? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
I don't have to give them permission. They don't need my permission. I can't stop it. I didn't mean it that way. But I have to be loving enough and understand myself enough, both in what I know and what I thought I know and what I don't know, to be able to be present with that and set the judgment aside, right? I mean, we've talked about some of the people who I interact with on social media, and there's some really angry, vocal folks out there, and they should be. I get it. So I personally have to challenge myself to, like, how does that make me feel, and reflect on it, and that's okay when I get rubbed the wrong way. I would love to share another clip if I could, but I'm happy to have another perspective on what we're talking about right now, or is it a good time to transition to this one?
Sure, do it.
Okay. I'm not going to tee it up. I'm just going to put it out there for us, and then we can talk about it. I'm sure you'll be nodding your heads because you'll remember this particular analogy.
Scholar Marilyn Fry uses the metaphor of a bird cage to describe the interlocking forces of oppression. If you stand close to a bird cage and press your face against the wires, your perception of the bars will disappear, and you will have an almost unobstructed view of the bird. If you turn your head to examine one wire of the cage closely, you will not be able to see the other wires. If your understanding of the cage is based on this myopic view, you may not understand why the bird doesn't just go around the single wire and fly away. You might even assume that the bird liked or chose its place in the cage. But if you stepped back and took a wider view, you would begin to see that the wires come together in an interlocking pattern, a pattern that works to hold the bird firmly in place. It now becomes clear that a network of systematically related barriers surrounds the bird. Taken individually, none of these barriers would be that difficult for the bird to get around. But because they interlock with each other, they thoroughly restrict the bird. While some birds may escape from the cage, most will not. And certainly those that do escape will have to navigate many barriers that birds outside the cage do not. The birdcage metaphor helps us understand why racism can be so hard to see and recognize. We have a limited view. Without recognizing how our position in relation to the bird defines how much of the cage we can see, we rely on single situations, exceptions, and anecdotal evidence for our understanding, rather than on broader interlocking patterns. Although there are always exceptions, the patterns are consistent and well documented. People of color are confined and shaped by forces and barriers that are not accidental, occasional, or avoidable. These forces are systematically related to each other in ways that restrict their movement.
Bang.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, and for me, that's not necessarily that analogy, but the first 3 chapters, understanding the concept of it, made me blame myself less for what I feel like I'm not as successful as I could have been on a business side. Because there's that, right? Like, all of my friends are looking at me as successful. And I'm like, I can't pay my mortgage some month. So to me, that's not the definition of successful. But then you look at it and you say, well, why can't I pay my mortgage? Well, because my mortgage is with Wells Fargo. I wonder if Wells Fargo has had any systematic issues with racism. Well, maybe that's why Wells Fargo wasn't willing to work with me. So it's the socioeconomic aspects of this racism and this institution of racism that prevents us from moving forward and taking care of ourselves in a manner that does not create this conflict that we're seeing in our world today. And it's kind of a little bit, I keep bringing this back, but it's not that we need more programs. We don't need more, affirmative action. We need more fucking awareness. Oops, sorry, Karen. We need more awareness. We need people to pay the hell attention. Because see, what happens is we all get so hung up in our own little space, our own little world, our own little universe, until the universe trips you in the morning like it did to me and said, hey, pay the hell attention.
It's internet radio, babe. You can say whatever word you want to say.
I know, but I try to allow myself only one.
That was true.
So you're done.
Raise the heat on Karen. So, Karen, we talked about the other day, we were talking about the mortgages. Remember that issue? And you just posted, you found that article or whatever I was quoting about the banks back in the 50s had in those agreements when they were selling to white people that they must not ever sell their house to a black person. I had no idea. You just put that out on the internet just yesterday or this morning or something. I read it.
If I could add two things. Oh, go ahead. Finish that, Annie. Sorry.
No, You've been behind that birdcage forever. There is no way you were going to be free. And we're just finally realizing, I mean, me as a woman, I've had barriers too, but certainly not like a black woman or a black person. And you've been behind that cage. That snippet was so revealing. And I don't think people realize how much you are.
They think it's self-induced.
Right.
People think we're doing something ourselves as the African Americans. They don't realize it's a system. And it's not a system of Annie doing it or Karen doing it or Camila doing it. It's massive, epic, mega. I don't know how many bigger words I can say. We can't overcome this. Go ahead, Karen.
Did you know, Karen, that we were lazy and that we were shiftless and that we didn't,
I'm one of the hardest working, I said this earlier this year, I'm one of the hardest working unemployed people on the face of the earth. I work 60 hours a week sometimes and don't make a dime. So, yeah, that birdcage, it's there.
Yeah, I get tired of hearing people say those things. Well, you guys are just lazy. You don't work hard enough. You don't do this. You don't do that. But what they don't realize, I'm not lazy. I have built 1, 2, 3, 4 businesses. Come on, people. Stop with the foolish thinking and think about what sits before you. You don't see it, but now you know about it. And that's that question. Oh, I don't know anything about that. Well, now you do. I just told you. Okay? Now
a song coming on. I've been lost, now I'm found. So share the story. Share the story about when you left your job and everybody said to you, "Oh, you're going to have a great time. You'll get a job in no time." And we were talking about
365 days. Nothing. One interview.
One interview
with a massive resume. Massive resume. Massive education. So here's the reality for me. I didn't even know all that. These are things that you only see in retrospect when you look back, when you put it all together. But when you're living it, you're just fighting the day. You're fighting to make it through the day to the next week. I mean, and that's what the last 8 years of my business has felt like. I'm just fighting to make it to the next day so I can continue to live in this house. But the thing is, I'm fighting things that I can't even see. Right? This corona and the coin shortage, as I referenced the other day. I can't even see them. And so I will tell you one thing to kind of finish off your point, Annie, about that story about not being able to find a job. I say to people now, don't ever tell someone when they leave a job or are fired or let go or whatever. Don't you ever tell them, oh, you'll have no problem finding a job. Don't you? I talk on people all the time about that, because that is not helpful communication to somebody. If all that does is try to make the person who's talking to you feel better, which is somewhat like this racism thing, right? It's like, I'm, as a Black person, trying to make you feel better about your freaking racism. What the hell kind of world do we live in that I have to make you feel better about your own goddamn bias?
One of the most crunchy statements that the author said in the book, because it made me crunchy, made me feel just because it made sense for me, was she said, how'd she say it? She was born in poverty, and she always felt ashamed about that. And as she got older and wiser and started to kind of make her way in the world, she could say to herself, basically, but at least I'm white. Like she said it a little bit different than that, but I thought, oh my God, I've had those thoughts. And that's that conditioning that I've had as an American white Catholic girl, that I've struggled. There's been times that I've struggled, but I've also said, well, I've got this. It's the word now is privilege. I've got this privilege, but that wasn't how I would have articulated. And dear God, nor would I've ever actually said that out loud. And to hear the author say that, I thought, wow, that's so telling about who we are and how we've just settled into this is just the way it is. Camilla?
Well, thank God for me being white.
I got to say, I got to take it back to Jane Elliott. And I don't know if you know who she was, but she did this renowned study, Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes thing, okay? And she said, this audience, she said, I want to know, if any one of you wants to be treated like Black people are treated, please stand up. Okay?
Wow.
Now, needless to say, well, she said, I guess you didn't hear me. Any one of you that wants Black people are treated, please stand up. No one stood up in that audience. She said, here's the answer. None of you all stood up, so that means you know what's happening. You know all about it, and you're not saying anything about it.
And you're doing it anyway.
You're complacent in it.
Yep.
Okay? So don't tell me that you don't know about it, okay, or you've never seen it, because if you're sitting in my shoes, you don't want to be treated the way I'm treated. So that means you're conscious of it. So I thought that was powerful for her, because it just tells everything. And the woman is just phenomenal.
Yeah, her way of talking and sharing, and really it's the way she presents the book is where the right balance kind of concept comes from. Because she did give you the right balance of kind of a shame on you for not knowing, but here's the information. It's on you. You know, she really does do a good job of balancing it to where it's not. I think people are afraid to read it because they don't want to deal with their own part of of being part of the racism. But you can't help it. You were born into the system.
Yes.
In that vein, she also brought up the test with the kids, that the kids are influenced from a very young age. And she did the test with, 5 and 6 year olds, and then 9 and 10-year-olds, about going in and they had money and they were supposed to distribute it to both Black and white children in the room with them. A certain group had the money. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That analogy? And it turned out that the younger 6 and 7-year-olds, they gave it out equally to the Black and the white. When I know what it was. So there was a white person not in the room and then one in the room. So they did that test. And so when the white person was in there, the younger group gave money to both the Black and the white children. When the adults, or the older group, they gave it less to the Black people, and they gave it equal to when the white person was in there, to look like, that they were being fair. And I just thought that it happened at such a young age. And that is also part of the problem, is what are we telling our children?
Right.
It's TV. It's not, I mean, I could go through that whole list. I don't know if you guys have gotten to that list in the book yet, where it talks about white everything. 90% of every company of Fortune 500 is white. 90% of medical doctors white. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on. And this was one of the statements that I made a couple weeks ago, was for the first time in my 57 years of taking my animals to the vets, I look up through tears of putting my dog to sleep, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a Black female vet. Like, even in my lowest times, I'm recognizing there's a freaking unicorn staring at me. God bless you, woman. I felt like it was like Tiny Tim. Like, God. I mean, see, but the reality is I make a joke of it because that's what I do. But it's funny, but it's not funny. Because let me just tell you, if you don't know anything about becoming a vet, if you want to go in debt and never be able to climb out, it's right up there with being a medical doctor. But vets, and this poor African-American woman who probably got grants and scholarships and all of this stuff, but she's going to have a ton. I mean, they're coming out of there with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And then to get into a practice, I mean, again, like I said not too long ago, I don't even know why I got into this business now that I know the numbers of success, the success rate numbers for an African-American. I'm thinking, girl, you needed to look in some books because your success rate, it sucks. You're going to be screwed. But where are you going to practice next? Because I'm going to follow you.
And you asked about what you guys can do. I'm going to make a shameless plug. UrbanIntellectuals.com has these great Black history flashcards. Okay, and I buy my summer kids. They are phenomenal. Okay,
those are awesome.
Black history flashcards.
American history. UrbanIntellectuals.com. You have to go to that website. Order yourself some cards.
I'll put the link in the comments.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and in our summary too, Karen.
It's such great history. Emerson Theater Collaborative has been using these and giving them to kids for years. They're just phenomenal history. Okay?
And it's different than the history.
You know what? I don't even think
Is it the real history Karen wants to know?
That's
or is it the white history?
Go ahead, Annie.
Operated by Black folks.
Oh, good. Okay, we're good.
So just want to let you know. Right? Just want to let you know. And I have with it, but they're so excellent. And it's such a great teaching tool. So I'm giving them a plug because I think they're just phenomenal. And so I'm supporting Black-owned business to the nth degree.
That's awesome. I definitely like that idea. We'll put that in the comments and the links in the summary for people to be able to access. One of the things I do want to share about the book is that I've been telling these ladies, like, you know those shows Scandal and how freaking phenomenal it was? But I'm a late watcher. I started binge watching it, and I watched like the first 6 years, blah, 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 blah. And then I got close to where I knew it was ending, and I didn't want to finish watching because I knew it was going to be over. And that's how I felt about this book. So I kind of just, for the last week, I only had like 3 or 4 chapters left to read. I didn't want to finish it because here's why. This came to me last night when I was thinking about this. Like, I knew I had to finish the book for this morning, but I feel like when your best friend from childhood who understands you like nobody else in the world does moves. Like, here's this person that understands Blackness and is white like nobody else. And she just moved across town and I don't have a car. I mean, like, seriously, it's the last chapters are as good as the first chapter. She provides all kinds of ways for you as a white American on how you can play your part in helping to bring change. And her
those are the 97 ways. Is that the one?
No, this is in.
What was the 97 ways? That was a
separate. Yeah, that was a lot of list. This is more communication talk, how to communicate, how to talk, how to react. What do you do? How do you if you find yourself in a scenario where you blundered and you realize you might have screwed up, and now how do you deal with your African American coworker, friend, or whomever? How do you move forward from there? And that, to me, is powerful information for anyone listening. It's not so much what can we do to change this mega institution. We're not going to change that overnight, but you can change the daily impact you have on people around you with what she has suggested in the last part of the book. That's why I'm so happy about the book. I'm so fantastic.
You can see who you are through the book. You can make those personal changes you need to make about yourself, because that's really where it stems from. Fix you first. And when guess what, people? You're on the road to success, because that's what it takes. Constantly looking at who you are and how you function every day and with people.
And the challenge.
I wanted to rewind a little bit and go back just before you shared all that, Karen. I wanted to go back and ask you and Camilla, because we're talking about history, Black history. What were you taught in school about Black history? Because I don't remember.
Nothing.
I grew up in.
I was taught U.S. history the exact same way you were taught.
It was white man's history.
Washington. Yes. It was white man's history. Yep. Same with, the only nice thing about Washington State is we have Washington State history, which was a requirement back when I was then, and it was all about Native American history. So I believe that was probably a little biased in its presentation as well, but at least I knew that portion of our, that geographic area.
But was it the true story of the Native American?
I know, that's what we don't know, right? We don't have a way of knowing.
Our elders will tell us so much more about our history. And so that is why I grew up with a lot of elderly people around me and learning my history from them, because that is where our history is true, because it gets passed and they'll tell you those stories. And so listening to our elders is so important. And our Native American elders have been telling us for a very long time, America, get your stuff together.
And respect the freaking land. Respect the land.
Yes, Mother Earth is speaking. And you need to get it together.
Mother Earth is mad as hell right now.
And so that's where I come from. You know what I'm saying? It's just real.
The piece that I'd like to add, what Karen had shared, and Camilla, you were encouraging us to take personal responsibility. I just want to speak from my own experience. And I know Camilla and Karen, I don't know if Annie was in this conversation, but I'm extremely busy. I'm going through a divorce. I've had the most hellacious year that I can think of, and I'm struggling in my business to keep up, and just all the life is changing for me in addition to COVID. And I found myself letting those things be my excuse to not make reading this book a priority prior to this. So I was like, it's good enough that I've offered this platform for a handful of episodes, and Karen and Camilla are going to be okay with it. And then I started listening to that dialogue and the lack of personal responsibility. Now, I haven't gotten through all the book, but boy, did I make sure after I caught myself in that untruth, or in that I was out of integrity with myself. Like, if I'm really going to say to you and look in your eyes and say, and put it out on social media and on the website and the platform and say, hey, this is important to me because I'm doing this, well, then I damn well better read that book and have this conversation. So I just no matter how busy you are and how much you don't think this is a conversation that matters for you because you live in your white neighborhood and your kids go to your white school and you have that token Black friend, please challenge yourself.
Me.
Yeah. Challenge yourself as I
have more than two.
Sorry, Karen.
No, you're good. Listen, we've only got about 4 minutes left until we need to close out this segment. So if we could, let's just have all three of you share. And actually, I want to play off of a question that Annie had shared with me prior to the segment. Let's leave with this. What are you going to do to stay uncomfortable around this topic? I think that's a really great question to end with, if you don't mind. And
I'll go since I asked it.
Since you did your homework.
I do see more now. There's so much more that I still don't know, but I want to be an ally. I want to be a voice. I want to, with all the thousands of women that have gone through me in my lifetime, there are just so many people that I know I can share this message with. I'm here. I think the gal from the last episode, was it Marianne Williams?
Well, no, we had Wendy Williams.
Wendy Williams. She said, seek to understand. And that really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. Seek to really understand. And not just when you're talking to somebody, listen. And I think I mentioned this to you before. Listening is not really the reality. It's really hearing what the person is saying. Hearing is more emotional. And so you really want to hear, because how many times have you listening to the radio and you're doing 5 things going on? You're not listening. But if you hear, right, that makes all the difference in the world. So that I'm going to be an ally. I'm going to seek to understand. I'm going to ask questions and hear what the person is saying. And I want to get feedback from my beautiful white women friends too. And I know a few of them are on this podcast today. We're going to have conversations now. And I'm going to do what I can do to help keep it moving forward. So thank you for the gift of tapping me on the shoulder to be here. It came out of the blue, and I knew I was ready for it. I first said, no.
You tried hard not to.
Somebody else would be better at it.
I knew you were ready, and so.
Well, thank you. It's a true gift, and I thank you. And okay, white women friends out there, come on, let's get it together. All right, who's next?
Uncomfortableness is good. I mean, I've been uncomfortable all of my life. In some aspect, way, shape, or form, and I want to continue to be that way. So the work in which I do, doing theater that is, people call it controversial, then this is going to be controversial because that's just who I am. And if I'm going to tell a story, I'm going to be uncomfortable with anybody else telling that story. We just did, again, Vivian's Music, which is probably one of the most beautifully written scripts I've read in a long time. And it's uncomfortable for white people to sit in that seat and watch that show. But it's something that has to be done. We have to be uncomfortable. And I love being uncomfortable in that moment when I'm sharing that gift, because then I see the growth in people and I just let them grow.
I just got goosies.
And I do think that this is a gift, and I'm getting so much really fantastic feedback from you guys, from the listeners who are sharing things like, just sharing ideas of what has come up from either just the conversation, having the openness and the opportunity to have these conversations, whether it's privately or on this platform. This is our gift to you as African American to try to make the world better for all of us. And we really need your help to be able to continue to do this. And so this is really where we start to ask you guys as, sponsors. If you are a small business out there and you want to continue this conversation to really help with this change, the racism institution, you can help us by becoming a sponsor. We're looking for premier sponsors. We're looking for some show sponsors. So just shoot me an email at Karen@nomossbrands.com. And that's moss in the green moss, not moss as in no. So we're looking for your help, because we feel like every time we have one of these conversations, there's so much more we want to go. I mean, we just are uncovering layers upon layers. And I think that you will find that as you start down this path, like even reading or listening to the book White Fragility, once you start down this path, it's a path that you just keep wanting going down. And so that is the thing that I myself have noticed. And now that I'm finished with the book, I'm like, what is my next book now? I don't know what my next book is. So if you have an idea, shoot it out to me, because I'm looking for it.
It's Grandma's Hand. It's by Resma Manican.
All right.
And
it's called My Grandma's Hand.
Who's
Grandma's Hand?
Annie, who's it
That's
by?
the next one.
All right.
How about you, Karen?
Well,
the other Karen.
Yeah. So thank you all for sharing how you're going to continue to stay in the conversation, stay uncomfortable, and be a beacon of light for unity. The book that I would like to recommend, although I haven't read it, but I wanted to mention it when Karen, when you were speaking about banking and money, Thomas Barr, who is the executive director for Local First Arizona, was on with us for our first segment. And in another segment he was on for a different show that we produce out of Phoenix Business Radio, he mentioned the book, The Color of Money.
Oh, yeah, that is a good one. That's on my list.
Okay, so if we want to hear and learn about the history of money, and particularly African American money, and where the challenges have been, and also where the money is, and how we can support small businesses, in addition to banking with people who are embracing unity. The Color of Money is a great book, and I apologize, I don't think I have the author in front of me, but thanks to Thomas Barr for recommending that.
That sounds like a good one.
Yeah, so we've got a couple more of these shows, at least a couple more in the hopper. And again, I just want to close by thanking our listeners, and we've all taken an opportunity to challenge not only our own thinking and admit to where we've been thinking and how we've been thinking and some of our experiences. We're going to keep bringing these conversations to you. If you have an idea of what you want to hear from us and or who we might invite in to have these conversations, please reach out to us through social media, or again, Karen at nomossbrands.com. Did I say that right, Karen?
Yep.
Good. All right. So again, we've been bringing together the right people in the right balance to have a delicate conversation surrounding racism and small business and the arts. I hope you've sensed that about us today. That's been our intention and our commitment. Every show provides the perspectives of both sides of the color spectrum. This is a place the comfortable come to be uncomfortable through the expansion of one's perspective. We hope you'll continue to join us. You've been listening to Phoenix Business RadioX, broadcasting live from within the Max 6 Conscious Workspace studio. Some media leans left, some media leans right, and we lean business. Until next time, I'm Karen Nowicki.